late 1960s, at a time in America when things were a little crazy. And many people of my generation were not satisfied with the values and the teachings and the guidance we were getting from conventional society, from our parents and so forth, and especially from religion. And so we rejected a lot of it. And we're searching for different ways of looking at the world, different ways of understanding who we are, how to live a happy life, successful, fulfilled life. And we were in the midst of a very materialistic attitudes of the mainstream culture. And we saw too many unhappy people. We knew that it wasn't the answer. And mainstream religion was asking us to believe in things that we found hard to believe. Mainstream Western religion is very belief-oriented. The doctrines, many of the doctrines did not stand up to logic or history or science. So we were rejecting. And in that mix of searching for answers and new ways of looking at the world, somehow, through a variety of means, the Sanatana Dharma teachings came to us. The Buddhist teachings, Vedantic teachings, yoga, through books written by Westerners about Vedanta and yoga, books which led us to translations of the Gita, to the Upanishads, and in that mix, gurus started coming to the West.
Let me make it more specific. For you personally, what was the first contact point with India and Indian philosophy?
It's very hard for me to remember because so much was going on at the same time. But there were a few things. Reading, and I don't know which books came first.
Okay.
But I'll tell you which were the important books, because books were circulating. Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi. Books by, in America, Vivekananda started institutions called the Vedanta Society. They started publishing books in the mid-20th century, and some of those books were written by combinations of swamis from India and Western intellectuals about Vedanta. And then they also published a very good translation of the Gita and of the Yoga Sutras. Those were some of the books. Autobiography of a Yogi. I read the Gita. That made a big impact. Emerson and Thoreau writing about Eastern philosophy made an impact. There were Westerners who were writing about Zen Buddhism. That had an impact. So all of those things in combination. It started with books, and then yoga teachers came, and gurus came, and then the Beatles. When the Beatles went to India and learned transcendental meditation, that was a big opening, big awakening for a lot of people, including me. And it put meditation on the map and made it more accessible, something we tried to do. So in 1968, I learned that method of meditation. 2 years later, I met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I became a teacher of his. And that commitment to there lasted a few years of deep involvement. So that was a big influence. It was that series of events got me started on the whole thing.
And how did this book, American Way?
So time goes by, and I'm living a life, and I taught for that Mahesh Yogi's movement for a while. Then I became a writer, and would lecture and write. And, over time, I started to see that that Vedanta and the methods of yoga were affecting not just people like me, but were starting to filter into mainstream society, into psychology, into healthcare system. And I started to notice surveys that showed there's big changes in American attitudes toward religion and spirituality. So I said, there's something going on here. It's not just me and my crazy friends who are into all this. It's really mainstream. Something bigger than that is going on. And I started thinking maybe there's a book in it. So in the mid-'80s, I proposed a book, and no publisher was interested.
Okay.
And so I said, okay, saying you're ahead of your time is a cliche, but in this case it may be true. So I'll see what happens. And I just kept thinking about it and putting notes and files. And then 20 years later, one of the religion editors at Random House had the same idea. And my agent put us together, and then we had the deal to do the book in the mid-2000s. And then it took a few years to get it written.
Okay, so the core of what you propagate through your thoughts and these lectures you take in the book is that there is a huge impact of India on the spiritualism of America, which is actually not highlighted the way it should have been.
Not
highlighted or underlined
Yeah.
the way it should have been. What do you think is the main reason?
because it's so subtle. Everybody knows, there were people like me who went to see gurus and study with gurus. Everybody knows there's millions of people taking hatha yoga classes.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows meditation has become part of mainstream healthcare and psychology. And every once in a while people will know there's some American who gets so devoted to this, he becomes a swami, or she becomes a yoga teacher, and she moves to India and lives in an ashram. But it was usually thought of as something on the fringes. Some of the influence is so subtle that what happens is people learn about Vedanta philosophy, Hindu Dharma, Buddhist Dharma, and they may adopt certain teachings into their lives, but it's not that visible. It's not like a new piece of technology.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that happens is the teachings get absorbed by individuals, and they assimilate it into their own field of expertise, and they remove from it the references to Sanskrit and the references to India or anything that looks religious. So
They remove it.
they'll change the language to make it more easy to communicate. Or you could be cynical and say easier to cash in and make money.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, psychologists may adopt these teachings, but with all good intention, if they have a patient or a counseling client, they don't want to freak that person out by saying this is a Hindu idea. They'll just render it into English and teach people a different way of looking at themselves or a meditation practice, and they'll just say, there's nothing religious about this, it's just to set calm down or whatever. And doctors will recommend meditation practices, but they won't use Sanskrit mantras and all that because people will think it's religious, so they change it. But and in many ways, many of the practices lose their effectiveness when they do that. But the ideas, the core teachings of Vedanta, they find their way into the American mainstream in English, in acceptable language, the language of psychology, sort of neutral spiritual language, and the language of self-improvement. There's a huge industry in America of self-help, self-improvement, and self-help books and self-help seminars. Most of the stars of those movements, of those teachings, have at one point in their lives studied some Vedanta and yoga. They had gurus in the 70s.